Karoline Crockett shuts down Judge Brett Kavanaugh's insults. Audience goes wild. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Brett Kavanaugh says, voice dry, eyes steady. Before you begin, I do hope your team had time to rehearse today's monologue. I know how important viral soundbites are in the TikTok era. The room doesn't laugh. It doesn't need to. The silence does the lifting. Karoline Crockett breathes once, slow, sharp. She doesn't blink. Let the record reflect, she says, that I didn't come here to flatter power. I came here to question it. Kavanaugh leans back, feigning calm. I'm sure you did. But if this is about headlines instead of the Constitution. Karoline cuts in, smooth but deliberate. Judge Kavanaugh, I don't take my oath to defend the Constitution as lightly as you take your interviews with friendly publications. A ripple goes through the room, staffers shifting, reporters looking up, fingers flying across keyboards. He chuckles under his breath. You're clever, Congresswoman. But cleverness won't override precedent. Karoline folds her hands. Precedent? Like the one you ignored in June Medical Services? Or Dobbs? Or West Virginia v. EPA? He raises an eyebrow. Those rulings followed legal principle. Legal principle without moral weight, she replies. Which might explain why mothers, daughters, and even your own classmates are protesting outside right now. Kavanaugh straightens slightly. I'm here to apply the law, not appease public emotion. Karoline tilts her head just enough. And I'm here to ask if the law you apply ever bothers to look people in the eye before it erases their lives. He doesn't answer. She leans forward, not physically but with presence. Do you know how many people watched your confirmation hearings and felt smaller after? Not because you're powerful, but because you made power look untouchable. You're politicizing the judiciary, he says, voice rising for the first time. I'm humanizing it, she shoots back. Because unlike you, I don't get to hide behind a robe when the cameras go off. Another pause. One that stretches. He taps a pen. Do you have a question or just prepared remarks? Karoline responds without hesitation. Yes. My first question is this. Do you believe the people most impacted by your rulings would recognize justice in them if your name weren't attached? He frowns. That's not a legal question. It's an American one. The room stirs again. Someone near the back whispers, she's not here to play. Kavanaugh shifts in his chair, finally sensing the weight of the moment. Let me be clear, she says. I don't need likes, Judge. I need the truth on the record. And you're going to help me put it there. He tries to pivot. If you want a civics lesson, I suggest. Karoline interrupts, calm as ever. You're right. I don't need a civics lesson. I lived it. You studied it. We're not the same. A staffer exhales loudly. Reporters glance up, eyes wide. The air feels wired now, like the hearing has just truly begun. Before continuing, Karoline pauses. Then turns her head slightly toward the cameras. To everyone watching, she says, drop your city in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to hear isn't a hearing. It's a reckoning. And with that, she turns back to the bench. Let's proceed. Judge Brett Kavanaugh clears his throat. I appreciate the Congresswoman's passion, he says, hands clasped like he's explaining something to a difficult student. But if we're going to speak in serious legal terms, we must return to the foundation, judicial responsibility, not political theater. Karoline doesn't blink. Judicial responsibility, she repeats, isn't supposed to be theater either, Judge. But somehow, families walk out of your rulings like they just lost something they never understood was at stake. Kavanaugh raises an eyebrow. Congresswoman Crockett, I was confirmed by the Senate to uphold the law, not feelings. Karoline shifts forward, voice steady. Good. Then let's talk law. Let's talk facts. Because behind every one of your rulings is a body count, and I'm not using that word lightly. He scoffs. This is inflammatory. This is real, she says. Let's start with Kalief Browder. His posture stiffens. 16 years old, she continues. Falsely accused. Couldn't afford bail. Held in solitary for nearly 2 years at Rikers. Beaten. Starved. Forgotten. You ruled that pretrial detention, even if extended, isn't unconstitutional if procedural protections are in place. Did Kalief have those, Judge? That case. Did Kalief have those? She repeats. He exhales. That decision. Don't explain the framework, Karoline interrupts. Answer the humanity. Did he have those protections? He doesn't speak. She leans in slightly. He took his own life. That's the footnote your ruling became. That was not a Supreme Court ruling, Kavanaugh responds, choosing technicality over empathy. That was a lower court precedent I acknowledged in a broader opinion. She nods. And that broader opinion has been cited in over 200 cases to justify continued detentions without trial. You don't get to hide behind distance. You're the shadow on every page now. He shifts, reaching for a glass of water. Are you suggesting that constitutional interpretation should be based on media narratives and emotional reaction? I'm suggesting it should be based on justice. And who defines justice in your world? He fires back. Karoline doesn't flinch. The people you don't see in your courtroom. Kavanaugh folds his arms. Congresswoman, I have served for over 3 decades. My record reflects fidelity to the Constitution. Your record reflects selective silence, she replies. You hear corporations. You hear billionaires. But when a teenage girl from Alabama testifies about her assault and asks why her rapist got 3 months, you hear process. He frowns. That's a mischaracterization of the ruling in that matter. Her name is Anna Trevors. She was 14. The man who assaulted her was sentenced under your precedent, which minimized sentencing discretion when mitigating factors included lack of prior offenses. Do you remember writing that paragraph? That ruling was never about that case. But that case used your words. She read your name in the courtroom while waiting for the sentence. Pause. She told her lawyer she felt like your pen had erased her. Reporters begin typing again. There's a shift in the room, not noise, just a quiet recalibration. Like everyone realizes the weight just changed hands. Do you want more names? Karoline asks. He doesn't answer. Lamont Henry. Shot twice in the back by an off-duty officer. His mother filed a civil suit. Your ruling in Torres versus Madrid narrowed the scope of what counts as a seizure. The officer walked. His mother cried in the parking lot. Do you know what she said? Congresswoman. She said, he was dead. But they ruled he hadn't been stopped. That ruling preserved the original understanding of the Fourth Amendment. That ruling told a mother that her dead son wasn't worth the ink in your dissent. Kavanaugh inhales sharply. With all due respect. She doesn't let him finish. You don't get to ask for respect while ignoring the wreckage your words cause. He turns toward the committee chair. Is this a hearing or a monologue? Karoline's voice cuts through before anyone can respond. This is a record. And I'm making sure it remembers who paid the price for your legacy. You're emotional. Karoline lets the silence breathe just long enough to make the moment feel earned. Then she says it clearly, emotion is not a weakness. It's what your court keeps ignoring. Emotion clouds judgment. No. It clarifies who's been forgotten. He presses back louder now. I don't answer to feelings. I answer to the law. She leans in. Then maybe the law should start answering to us. The room freezes. No one dares shift. Karoline continues, voice lower now but sharper. Because justice, she says, isn't just a ruling. It's a reflection. And if you looked in the mirror of your own record, you might not like what looks back. Kavanaugh doesn't reply. He can't. The crowd watches him try to find a counterpoint that doesn't sound hollow. He fails. She speaks again. You think you know what justice looks like. But I've seen it in mothers with folded flags, in daughters afraid to testify, in men released after 20 years because you called their trial procedurally sound. That's not justice. That's cruelty in cursive. He reaches for a file, trying to pivot, but his fingers stall. Karoline doesn't stop. So let me ask you again, Judge, do you know what justice looks like? Or have you only ever seen it from the bench, never the broken? He finally says something. Quietly. I have always followed the law. And they followed your rulings, straight into silence. For a moment, no one speaks. Even the chairman doesn't intervene. Then Karoline straightens her posture, her voice smooth again. This hearing isn't about your feelings, Judge. It's about the names that never made it to your chambers. I came here to speak for them. And I'm not done. Let me ask you something specific, Judge, Karoline says, her voice a thread of steel. You remember Turner versus Mississippi, don't you? Kavanaugh doesn't look up. That was a state-level matter affirmed by the Fifth Circuit. We declined to review it. Karoline nods once. Yes. You denied certiorari. But the decision the Fifth upheld was built on the back of your own interpretation of the plausibility standard from Ashcroft versus Iqbal. Do you remember what that ruling did? Kavanaugh clears his throat. The court held that a complaint must contain sufficient factual matter to state a claim that is plausible on its face. She leans slightly forward. Right. And because of that language, plausible on its face, a black woman in Mississippi who was beaten, fired, and then denied legal recourse for reporting sexual harassment, was told she didn't adequately allege enough harm. That wasn't my court's direct decision, Kavanaugh replies, calm but defensive. The petition was denied. That doesn't constitute an opinion. But your precedent made it possible, Karoline says. Her name is Gloria Lyles. She worked as a janitor at a community college. She reported her supervisor for stalking her in the parking lot. Weeks later she was fired for attendance issues. The appellate court said her claim didn't meet the plausibility threshold. She didn't present enough evidence, Kavanaugh says quietly. She had a restraining order, Karoline shoots back. She had medical records showing bruises. Her supervisor's text messages included, quote, "I always get what I want." But the court said it was speculative. That word came straight from your ruling. She failed to establish a pattern of conduct that met. She failed to convince a system designed not to listen. The room goes quiet again. But Karoline is already in motion. Is that what you would have told her, Judge? She asks. If Gloria Lyles had walked into this chamber and asked you directly, would you have said, "Your bruises aren't plausible enough"? He doesn't answer. Karoline doesn't wait. Would you have told her to rewrite her story so the court could finally read it? Kavanaugh sits back, fingers tense. Karoline continues. Because she cried outside that courthouse. She told reporters, quote, "It's not that I wasn't hurt. It's that I didn't sound like the kind of woman they believed." That's tragic, he murmurs. It's not tragic, she fires back. It's judicially endorsed abandonment. He stiffens. You're putting words in my mouth. No, I'm reading the ones you already published. The air gets sharper now. No one's tapping phones anymore. The committee chair doesn't interrupt. Everyone seems to know they're watching a pivot, not in the argument but in history. Karoline pulls out a sheet of paper. It shakes slightly. Not from fear but from weight. Let's keep going, she says. One by one. Maybe if I read them into the record, someone in this room will remember them. Kavanaugh interjects. This is not. But she doesn't stop. Case 1, Arlene Torres. A migrant farm worker in Arizona. She reported wage theft, was deported within days, then denied standing to sue. The ruling cited your language on unclean hands and qualified immunity. Kavanaugh opens his mouth, but again she continues. Case 2, Damian Reynolds. Diagnosed bipolar, jailed after a noise complaint. Beaten by 3 guards. Your precedent limited the scope of qualified immunity to clearly established rights, which the court decided didn't include mental health protocols. That case was litigated under your framework, Karoline finishes. He raises a hand. You're reducing complex constitutional questions to talking points. She slams her folder shut. No, Judge. I'm translating your language into the lives it crushed. Pause. Then she speaks again, more measured. Do you understand what happens when someone like you says, "We're just applying precedent"? It becomes a shield. Not for justice. For distance. He sits back, arms crossed. Congresswoman, our role is not to chase every emotionally charged narrative. It is to uphold what the Constitution allows. Then allow me to remind you what it doesn't allow, she says. It doesn't allow cruelty cloaked as neutrality. It doesn't allow silence when the court knows better. And it does not, under any clause, require forgetting who paid the price. She opens the folder again. Case 3, Rochelle Diggs. Fired after refusing to falsify time cards. Denied unemployment. Her boss was the brother of a city judge. The court dismissed it for failure to state a claim. He cuts in. That was not a federal matter. And yet, Karoline says, the local court cited federal standards derived from Bell Atlantic Corporation v. Twombly, another opinion you leaned heavily on. The ripple effect of your reasoning is nationwide. I can't control how lower courts misinterpret. No, but you can control what you write into history. He exhales. Congresswoman, I believe in judicial restraint. Karoline meets his gaze. Then restrain yourself from dismissing stories as anecdotes. A long pause follows. Then she continues, her voice low. There was a woman in Mississippi, Judge. She believed in the law. She believed that telling the truth would protect her. That someone in a robe would care. She looks up. She found out that even when she followed every rule, she still wasn't plausible enough. Kavanaugh shifts. The standard exists to prevent meritless suits. And yet somehow the people with the least power always seem to fall below it. He says nothing. She speaks again. Is that what you would have told the woman in Mississippi, Judge? That her pain needed better punctuation? That her affidavit lacked narrative cohesion? that she should have rewritten her own trauma in legalese. He remains silent. Because she said something else, Karoline adds. She said, I thought justice was a door. I didn't know it had so many locks. The room is still. Karoline looks back down. Those are your locks, Judge. The decisions you shaped. The words you normalized. She breathes in. And every time you say, we followed procedure, someone else learns that procedure was never designed for them. Karoline closes the folder slowly. The air is tight now. Not loud. Just alert. Kavanaugh leans back. Not smug. Just still. Karoline doesn't speak right away. Instead, she watches him, quietly. Then she begins. Judge, she says, do you know her name? He blinks once. She doesn't fill the silence. Do you remember her name? She repeats. He shifts slightly. Congresswoman, if you're referring to the woman from... No, Karoline says. I'm asking you if you remember her name. He clears his throat. I preside over thousands of pages of legal documentation each term. Names? She cuts him off. But this one was different. She testified. Her story made headlines. Her face was on your desk in the form of an affidavit. He sits up straighter. I'm not sure who you're referring to. Karoline leans in, her voice calm, never rising. Her name is Elena Waters. She was a nurse in Kentucky. Fired after reporting unsafe conditions in a hospital during a pandemic. Her whistleblower protection claim was denied because of a narrow reading of statutory timing. That interpretation came directly from your concurring opinion. She pauses. Do you know her name now? He doesn't respond. She lost her job. Then her home. She lived in her car with her 2 kids. She sent an open letter to your office. Never got a reply. Karoline folds her arms. Do you remember her name, Judge? A faint murmur moves through the back row. A journalist raises a phone slowly, not to take a picture but to start typing. Karoline lets the silence breathe again. Then, do you know his name? Kavanaugh blinks. I need you to be more specific. Jerome Adams, she says. He was denied post-conviction DNA testing after serving 28 years in prison. The circuit court relied on your interpretation of finality doctrine. He died 6 months later from liver failure. Still incarcerated. Kavanaugh exhales through his nose. I do not recall the specifics of that case. You remember your own footnote in the opinion, she counters. You said, and I quote, the state has a compelling interest in the finality of verdicts. He starts to speak but Karoline keeps going. Do you know Ana Solis? 17 years old. Pregnant. Denied emergency care in Texas after a hospital cited ambiguous legal liability post-Dobbs. She miscarried in a parking lot. The state's justification? Your ruling's language around unambiguous state interest in unborn life. Kavanaugh lifts his pen. That was not a Supreme Court directive. But it was your language, she says sharper now. Language the Fifth Circuit called guiding. Language lawmakers quoted on television. He opens his mouth. She raises her hand. I'm not finished. The committee doesn't stop her. The chair is watching closely, arms folded. Karoline breathes in. Her voice softens. But the words don't. Do you know Jared McKinney? 19. Shot in a traffic stop. The officer said Jared moved too fast. Body cam showed no weapon. His parents sued. The court dismissed it, citing qualified immunity. The opinion cited Pearson versus Callahan and Graham versus Connor, both reinforced in your writings. He shifts again. Those are long-standing precedents. And you upheld them, she cuts in. You preserved them. You refined them. And Jared's parents buried their son because of them. She straightens the stack of papers in front of her. Do you remember Tamika Yates? She was denied emergency housing after a flood destroyed her building. FEMA rejected her claim based on state coordination delays. Your ruling in Department of Homeland Security versus Regents limited the scope of federal agency obligations. Her case cited it directly. He sighs. Congresswoman, it is not feasible. To remember all their names, she interrupts. I agree. But it is possible to remember that each name had a life attached. There is no reply. Karoline glances toward the journalists. Some of you are tweeting this, right? They nod. Good, she says. Because this is the part no one usually prints. She turns back to Kavanaugh. Do you know Marcus Trillman? He doesn't even try. Karoline speaks slowly now, almost rhythmically. 23. Locked up for unpaid court fees. Died from untreated diabetes complications. Your ruling in Bearden versus Georgia, which you reinterpreted in a dissent, argued that the mere imposition of a financial penalty does not violate equal protection if applied neutrally. She pauses. His mother found him unconscious in a cell. Neutrality doesn't comfort her. He finally speaks. We cannot make rulings based on outcomes. We interpret law as written. Karoline folds her hands. That's the problem. Another silence. You interpret law as if it's a wall, she says. Not a mirror. He sits back. I am not responsible for individual consequences of lawfully correct decisions. But you are responsible, she says, for how many times you chose silence over naming the harm. Congresswoman. Do you know Dolores Hicks? She says louder now. He flinches slightly. Do you know Richard Hooper? Kayla Thomas? Luis Calderon? Fatima Baloch? He doesn't speak. Because they know you, Karoline says. She leans back finally. They know your name. It's on the paper that closed the door in their faces. She lets it sit. Then, the next time you talk about judicial restraint, remember it doesn't restrain the pain. It only restrains accountability. No one moves. Even the aides have stopped writing. Kavanaugh adjusts his tie. Karoline closes her binder. I didn't come here to read statistics, she says. I came to read names. Because names carry weight. Names hold memory. She locks eyes with him. And this time, Judge, you don't get to forget. Judge Brett Kavanaugh breaks the silence first this time. This isn't a courtroom anymore, he says, his voice firmer than before. It's a theater. Karoline doesn't respond immediately. She's been waiting for this shift, the moment when composure gives way to defense. Kavanaugh continues, more pointed now. Congresswoman Crockett, it's clear you're here to perform. Not to question. Not to engage. You've had your moment. The cameras have what they need. Karoline lifts her chin. Did you just accuse me of performance, Judge? He doesn't flinch. You've been grandstanding for over an hour. And I've sat here respectfully while you traded the law for headlines. Karoline gives a dry smile, not amused, not offended. Just ready. No, she says. You sat there because you're used to the robe protecting you from the mirror. Kavanaugh leans forward. You have no respect for the rule of law. And you, she replies, have no respect for the people the law has failed. He exhales. I've dedicated 3 decades to the judiciary. What have you done? Karoline doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't have to. I've buried a client who died waiting for the appeal you denied. I've held the hand of a mother who had to explain to her daughter why her rapist got to keep teaching middle school. I've sat across from men you called insufficiently credible, who were later exonerated after 30 years. That's what I've done. Kavanaugh's voice sharpens. Then maybe you should have studied harder instead of turning hearings into soapboxes. Karoline slowly opens a folder labeled, Public Statements 2003 to 2020. Power doesn't mind performance, she says. It minds exposure. He pauses. She begins to read. May 2, 2003. You told the Federalist Society, I believe there are times when the court must not only follow the law, but shape the public's understanding of it. He straightens. That quote is taken out of context. She flips the page. April 2014. You gave an interview to Judicial Viewpoint magazine. When asked about decisions that caused public backlash, you said, and I quote, the public forgets. History doesn't. Eventually, it all evens out. Kavanaugh's lips tighten. That was a philosophical reflection, not a statement of judicial doctrine. Karoline doesn't blink. It was a confession. You're twisting my words. I'm just making them visible. He tries to regain footing. This is not a deposition. This is an oversight hearing. Exactly, she replies. An oversight requires sunlight. Kavanaugh raises his voice. You're not here to investigate. You're here to vilify. Karoline closes the folder slowly. No, she says. I'm here to remind you that your words were never forgotten. Just buried. He tries a new tactic. You cherry-pick phrases. You drag out anecdotes. That's not serious jurisprudence. It's political theater. She folds her hands. You mean like the hearing where you cried about beer but couldn't recall your emails to Republican operatives? A flicker crosses his face. That was a coordinated smear campaign. Karoline raises an eyebrow. So when you're the one under scrutiny, it's a smear. But when the powerless get crushed by your rulings, it's just precedent. You're weaponizing public opinion. And you've spent years weaponizing neutrality. Kavanaugh slams his hand lightly on the table. I will not be lectured on power by someone who doesn't understand the weight of a ruling. Karoline's voice is soft. You came here to lecture me on power? He glares. You're out of your depth. Maybe, she says. But I'm still breathing in it. And some of us learned how to swim in deep waters. He tries to pivot. We're drifting from the Constitution. You mean the one you once called a living document in a private donor retreat? She asks. That transcript was never authenticated. Then let's authenticate it now, she says, producing a copy. This is your own words, Judge. Don't act surprised. You said, and I quote, the Constitution was meant to reflect values in motion, not values in stone. He looks toward the committee chair for help. The chair stays still. Karoline's voice lowers. You play two games, Judge. One in public, one in private. But eventually, the transcripts bleed together. Kavanaugh scoffs. This is a circus. No, Karoline replies. This is accountability. It just feels unfamiliar. She lets the silence build. Then, with calm precision, she places one more file on the table. This, she says, is a sworn deposition from a whistleblower in 2018. It alleges that you pressured a lower court clerk to alter a memo regarding dissent language. The case was buried under administrative review. He goes pale. That's a baseless accusation. Then you won't mind if we unseal the full correspondence? He says nothing. Karoline speaks again. Power doesn't mind pressure. It minds daylight. If this moment left you speechless, type exposed in the comments right now. Senator Cory Booker speaks softly at first, but the room quiets when he does. She's not making this personal, Judge, he says, nodding toward Karoline. You did that first. When you decided who deserves a voice and who deserves a footnote. Kavanaugh doesn't look at him. I've remained within constitutional boundaries. I've made no personal attacks. Booker raises a brow. But your decisions did. They told people their trauma wasn't structured enough to be believed. That their timing was off. That their bodies didn't count as evidence. Kavanaugh folds his arms. I followed the law. And the law, Booker replies, follows memory whether you admit it or not. Karoline picks it up from there. Come. Cold. Certain. Judge, she says, you keep asking for legal proof. Let's make it legal. He blinks. Excuse me? I'd like to formally enter these names into the congressional record, she says, lifting the folder. All of them. The men and women whose cases, claims, and pleas were dismissed under doctrines you helped sharpen. Not as protest. As precedent. Kavanaugh's voice is tight. That's not. She cuts in. They deserve to be remembered in more than the margins. The clerk steps forward. The list is handed off. Booker leans forward again. Because legacy, Judge, isn't what you write. It's what they say when you're not in the room. Kavanaugh doesn't respond. Karoline looks directly at him. And when the cameras turn off, she says, I want their names to still be here. Stamp. Official. Real. No one claps. No one speaks. But the hearing no longer feels like his. It belongs to the names. And they are louder than silence. Karoline doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. She closes the folder slowly, then looks up, directly at Kavanaugh. You've spent this hearing believing it was about you, she says. Your reputation. Your restraint. Your rulings. He shifts but says nothing. It never was. Her words are calm, unshaking. You're not the moment. They are. She gestures, once, toward the record now entered, the stack of names printed and logged into history. They're the ones we'll remember. The ones whose names were almost lost in legal language. The ones whose stories were ruled out of order. Kavanaugh presses his lips together, still silent. Karoline continues. Your legacy is already written in your opinions. But theirs? It had to be spoken aloud because no one with power ever bothered to. There's a pause. She breathes in. Then. This hearing was not a protest. It was an echo. Of all the voices your decisions didn't make space for. A ripple moves through the audience. No applause yet, just wait. Let it be known, she says finally, that when power refused to speak their names, we did. She closes her binder. And this time the room claps. Not for performance. Not for politics. But for memory. Kavanaugh doesn't interrupt. He doesn't object. He folds his paper. Quietly. And for the first time in hours, he doesn't try to take the last word. Was this the most powerful moment you've seen in political debate? Comment your thoughts. And subscribe if you believe truth still matters in power. The hearing ends. But the story doesn't. News headlines carry the moment before the gavel even drops. The clip goes viral by midnight, Karoline's voice, steady and unflinching, cutting through a generation of doctrine. The hashtag trends by morning, hashtag she named them. Law professors dissect the exchange on Sunday panels. Civil rights attorneys email the transcript to interns. Students in lecture halls read her words out loud, not for grade but for memory. Kavanaugh's defenders call it spectacle. But no one forgets the silence. No one forgets the moment when a judge known for pages of precision sat still while the weight of the forgotten was read into the record. It wasn't about courtroom decorum. It wasn't about cleverness. It was about truth, spoken without fear, without apology, and received not with applause, but with the kind of silence that follows something irreversible. And somewhere in a first-year law course a professor pauses and says, "This is the transcript they'll quote in law schools."